So, what could a 16th century African samurai, rebellious Tokyo teens from the 90s, and a Japanese faith that's thriving in Brazil possibly have in common? I know, it sounds like the setup to a pretty weird joke, but the answer actually reveals this incredible hidden pattern, one that kind of flips what we think we know about Japan's identity on its head. Today, we're going to connect these dots that seem totally random to uncover a fascinating story about culture, clashing, and creating something new. All right, let's jump right in. Our whole story kicks off with this wild description written way back in 1581. I mean, just try to picture the scene in feudal Japan for a second. A man shows up, and his appearance is so different that it's compared to a black cow. This isn't just some dusty historical fact. It's the explosive start of a major cultural collision, and it's the very first piece of our puzzle. So the man's name was Yasuke, and he shows up in Japan with some Jesuit missionaries. Almost immediately, he catches the eye of one of the most powerful and, frankly, terrifying figures in all of Japanese history, the great warlord Oda Nobunaga. And Nobunaga wasn't just interested, he was completely captivated. Get this, he didn't even believe Yasuke's skin color was real at first. He thought it was some kind of ink and actually ordered him to be stripped down and scrubbed to prove it. But what's really mind-blowing here is just how fast everything happened for Yasuke. I mean, think about it. He arrives in 1581 and causes a literal stampede. People were getting crushed trying to get a look at him. Nobunaga is so impressed not just by his appearance, but by his strength and intelligence that he makes him a trusted retainer. And then, within a single year, 1 year, Yasuke is given money, a house, and officially becomes a samurai. He even fought in battle for Nobunaga's family after the warlord died. It's just an incredible story of being absorbed into a new world. Okay, now let's hit the fast forward button and jump ahead 400 years. That same kind of fascination with Black culture pops up again, but this time it's on the streets of Tokyo in the 1990s. It's not a warlord admiring a warrior anymore. Now it's young Japanese people taking an outside influence and twisting it into something that's totally their own. So how did this fascination go from admiration to an all-out act of rebellion? Well, welcome to the world of ganguru. The name itself literally translates to blackface, and it was a youth subculture that just exploded in the 90s. We're talking deeply, deeply tanned skin, bleach blonde hair, and really stark, heavy makeup. This whole look was a direct nod to American R&B and hip-hop artists who were becoming huge global stars. You have to understand, it was a radical, deliberate turn away from the traditional Japanese beauty standard of pale skin and dark hair. But this was so much more than just fashion. As the scholar Joseph Barden puts it, this was a huge social statement. For these young women, dressing this way was their ticket out of the super rigid expectations of mainstream Japanese society. The dark skin, the bright hair, it was all, as he says, a visual cue. It was them screaming to the world that they were opting out and not playing by the old rules. This was rebellion you could see. Okay, so far, we've seen culture flowing into Japan and getting remixed. But the story gets even more interesting when that current reverses. What happens when something that's uniquely Japanese, in this case a religion, gets exported and actually starts to thrive in a totally different place? For our next stop, we're heading to Brazil. Now, this is one of those things you probably wouldn't expect. Brazil is the biggest Catholic country in the world, and yet these Japanese new religions, like the Church of World Messianity, have somehow managed to get hundreds of thousands of followers there. It's a faith based on Shinto beliefs that focuses on a kind of spiritual healing, and it managed to cross this massive cultural and religious ocean and find a new home thousands of miles away. Now, your first thought might be, okay, well, Brazil has a huge ethnic Japanese community, so that's probably who it is. But check this out. A full 60% of the church's followers in Brazil are not ethnically Japanese. That's huge. It shows an incredible ability to adapt, proving the religion could change just enough to connect with people far, far outside of its original cultural bubble. So you have this amazing success story of Japanese culture fitting in perfectly abroad, which makes what happens next even more poignant. What happens when the children and grandchildren of Japanese immigrants try to come back to Japan? What happens when the place you've always thought of as your homeland doesn't exactly feel like home? And this brings us to the Dekasegi. The word refers to people of Japanese descent, mostly from Brazil, who moved to Japan looking for work, especially back in the late 80s and 90s. Japan's economy was booming and they needed workers. For many of the Dekasegi, it felt like this long-awaited return to the motherland they'd heard stories about their entire lives. But the reality they found was a total culture shock. It was just painful. See, in Brazil, their Japanese heritage made them stand out, but when they got to Japan, their accents and their different cultural habits meant they were treated like foreigners, gaijin. Many of them left middle-class lives in Brazil only to end up doing really tough blue-collar factory jobs in Japan. That romantic idea of coming home was just shattered and replaced by this feeling of being an outsider everywhere. So let's just pause for a second and connect these dots. We've got Yasuke, the admired outsider who gets absorbed into the warrior class. We have the Genguro girls who absorbed an outside culture in order to rebel. And we have the Dekazegi, who feel like outsiders in what should be their home. These stories feel like they're from different planets, but they all follow this strangely similar pattern. Is there one big idea that can tie all of this together? Well, turns out there is. It's a concept with a pretty intense name: creative masochism. Now, I know that sounds rough, but the idea behind it is incredibly powerful. It basically describes this tendency to take a situation where you're in a passive or even negative position, like, say, being flooded by a powerful foreign culture, and you actively transform that experience into something totally new and self-aware. It's not about enjoying the suffering, it's about turning the very act of being influenced into a source of creative power. And you can see this exact three-step pattern in all our stories. It all starts with an encounter. An African man lands in feudal Japan, American hip-hop hits Tokyo, a Brazilian way of being Japanese develops. Then comes absorption. The foreign thing is taken in, studied, adapted, like Nobunaga's fascination with Yasuke. And finally, here's the magic step: transformation. That outside influence gets remade into something brand new, creating a unique and sometimes conflicted new identity. Yasuke becomes a samurai, imitation becomes rebellion, and the Dekasegi have to create a new hybrid identity just to survive. So what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, it's that the popular image we have of Japan, this idea of a historically isolated, uniform culture, it just doesn't really hold up. What these stories show us is a history that's defined by constant, dynamic, and transformative exchange with the rest of the world. It's a story about absorbing and recreating, not about putting up walls. And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought. You know, the stories of Yasuke, the Genguro girls, and the Dekasegi aren't really just about Japan. They're about all of us, living in this totally globalized world. They force us to ask ourselves, when cultures are constantly mixing and flowing in every direction, what does identity even mean anymore? And in the middle of all that, where do any of us really find home?